Well, the crisis in Kano began with the amendment of the Emirates law by the Kano State House of Assembly, which subsequently led to the dethronement of Emir Ado Bayero by the new ANPP governor. The reinstatement of Muhammadu Sanusi as Emir of Kano has led to disputes before the courts. The various legal tussles are currently on appeal. Political analysts say a prompt judicial resolution of the issue is required to put an end to the crisis.
Well, let's bring in lawyer and Rajni's analyst Frank Tietie for more on this developing story. Great to see you.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
Well, as we've heard, it all began with the law and governors trying to repeal the law on chieftaincy and emirates in Kano State. But as it stands at the moment, Frank Tietie, you understand the law. Who is the Emir of Kano in the eyes of the law?
Well, when it comes to matters of chieftaincy, it is the state government that has jurisdiction. It is within the ambit of the state government's powers, the powers of the State House of Assembly, to determine who is a particular traditional ruler, in this case, the Emir of Kano. So when we had a new government in place in Kano that eventually got the House of Assembly to repeal the old law, and then eventually that reinstated Sanusi Lamido as the Emir of Kano, that ought to stand and it should not be contended in any way. However, you know, people have access. It's a fundamental right it's a right of every individual in Nigeria to be able to have access to the court. So many interested parties have approached the court, but you know, the issue of jurisdiction in law is very important. So when you now have a situation where you have multiplicity of court orders affecting the same subject matter, the appropriate thing is that the presumption is that the judges who made those orders knew the law, and they should have actually stayed on the side of the law by not delving into issues where they ought not to. And then it becomes a situation of a state of emergency when the courts of the land cannot easily, quickly resolve issues to the extent that they keep lingering, and then the crisis continues until it snowballs into a conflict.
You know, I was actually going to ask you why it's taken the courts this long to decide decisively on this crisis and how that affects the deepening tensions in that region. But I also wanted to ask about the back and forth. They're saying, oh, look, we're blaming the federal authorities. We don't know what's going on. What sort of message does this kind of military-style presence send about governance and the respect for traditional institutions in our country?
Well, traditional institutions are actually, in a way, subjected to some form of, they are inferior to constituted government in terms of elected government, in this case, the president and the governor. But, you know, what we see here is a reflection of the dysfunctionality of a state that has refused to organize itself as a true republic that respects law. So in that, because there is you see, there's a whole dose of pretension that we as citizens and those who actually exercise authority must imbibe, and that is, we must pretend to be operating under the law. But when we decide to discard the law when it suits us, when it favors us, when it doesn't favor us, and then you know, make use of it when it favors our cause, it creates confusion, and ultimately the society loses its fabric for cohesion, and that's dangerous for social order. Now, what is actually expected is that the judiciary exists for one principal reason: to ensure that conflicts are resolved so that peace can be certain. So when the judiciary fails to do that, because there are bound to be conflicts, but what the public often fails to understand is that there is a politics of the judicial process, of the legal process. A lot of politics are involved. Delay can be used as a tactic, and then the filing of frivolous cases, and then exercise of influence over judicial officers, it has become a very big problem in the politics of the judiciary and how it affects social order. And Kano State, to a large extent, River State, have all become, good examples of how not to, how not to allow the judiciary not to function. In this case, we have a clear dysfunctional, disrespected judiciary in our country, and it's reflecting badly.
Indeed. So what ought to look like one judiciary has turned out to be like an institution providing commotion.
Yes, unfortunately.
So you agree with those who say that the judiciary has exacerbated the issue in Kano State?
No. Yes, of course.
Instead of bringing clarity and stability, they're bringing more confusion.
Not only Kano State, and it's general in our country. And the good thing is that lawyers and judges, to a large extent, given the declaration by the body of benchers that, you see, the idea of conflicting judgments will create serious, not only anarchy, but, total disintegration of society. Therefore, it has attempted to, correct it. But it's not rocket science. And the Federal High Court has tried, even though it has just one jurisdiction, and so you have several Federal High Courts across the country. But you see, there is some measure of coordination by the requirement that you should, as a litigant and a lawyer, first as a litigant, depose an affidavit that you're not aware that such and such a matter has been filed in any other jurisdiction before coming to Abuja or going to Kaduna to get a particular order, so that there won't be confusion. The lawyer also has a responsibility, or else he will be disciplined, by misleading the court. But what we see here is that the desperation to use the judiciary as a tool, and the judiciary not being able to protect itself from being used either by politicians, either by interested parties, or even unscrupulous lawyers. And then we have a real big problem in our social system right now, when the judiciary is unable to discharge its constitutional functions.
And a problem within the judiciary, because this undermines confidence of the people in the judiciary.
Which has been seriously battered. There's no doubt about that.
Exactly. And now we also have this issue of sort of secrecy. We're not really sure, or the presence of these security agencies is quite unclear right now. Shouldn't there be more sort of transparency in situations like this? And what does this imply? The silence is a bit too loud.
Yes, I agree. You see, the sense of accountability to the people needs to increase, I would say. Whenever, even if the local police does anything, makes any significant arrest, it should hold a press conference.
Yes.
The police should explain its presence in the Kano State, in the Kano Emirates Palace as we speak. But it hasn't. Now, don't forget that the police is being controlled by the federal government. That's the reason why Bichi is able to pointedly accuse the federal government of attempting to cause confusion. Regarding a chieftaincy matter, it's a chieftaincy that is regulated by a state law. Now, the painful part of it is that we've had four contradictory orders with regards to the Kano Emirates tussle. So, expectedly, why can't the Court of Appeal, in which the matter is resident at this time, realize that there is some measure of urgency to this matter, that it should decide it so quickly. The same manner we are not supposed to be uncertain with regards to those who are supposed to be proper legislators in Rivers State. So the judiciary must now realize that it cannot have this label of not being able to perform its function, and not only that, being regarded as a temple of justice that is often delayed too far off until the head is off because of conflict that could have been prevented by a simple resolution of the issues. I mean, what stops the court from sitting? We're talking about Kano State. Kano is a very volatile state, because we have a lot of politically savvy and highly conscious persons living in Kano. It doesn't matter how educated you think they are or not, but you don't expect that such a matter that has importance, that has to do with the tradition of the people, and there is conflict, a court. First and foremost, the Federal High Court has got no business, there's no doubt about that, and it should have acknowledged that. But we also appreciate the principle under Section 287 of the Constitution that, yes, a court must at every point in time attempt to enforce its authority. And but do you now need to punish the Kano people by creating confusion? The court ought to have decided. The Court of Appeal ought to have decided, and then the federal government can now be seen to either be respecting the order of court or be disobeying. So we know who is attempting to cause confusion in the polity.
While we put a lot of blame on the judiciary and the courts, we cannot overlook the role of politics in all of this. Today, the state government is accusing the federal government of what has happened in Kano State today, blocking the emir blocking the palace of the emir. But let me ask you, with all of this confusion, can we still look to the courts to resolve the issue with the emirship in Kano?
Of course.
Or do you see a political solution here? Because the law repealing the emirship remains intact, even though the Federal High Court did not have jurisdiction. It did not meddle with that law. So that law is still intact by the State House of Assembly. which enthroned Sanusi Lamido as the current emir of the state. So where is the solution? Where do we look to?
So in my view, and I'm happy that the then NBA president, Yakubu Mekiao, didn't mince words with regards to who should be the proper emir. Without any form of bias here, going by the law that has been enacted, validly enacted by the State House of Assembly, Lamido Sanusi is the emir of Kano, and I think the Federal High Court is not contending that. But you see, I think what Kechi was trying to say is that why the police owes Nigerians, I would say, some form of explanation why it's carrying out that kind of blockade. However, do not forget that there was also an order of a court, and I believe that that court has not been set aside, that actually mandates, that gives the police the ground for doing whatever it has done today. Now, that makes it go back to the judiciary. Why would there be such contrary orders? But to think that the matter is resident at the Court of Appeal, the Court of Appeal ought to have resolved it. So at this point, don't forget that the police may also be riding on its constitutional, well, I would say statutory responsibility that it is maintaining order. But you see, the problem is this. This is Kano State, and I think I want to align with Bichi, where in a situation there is peace. We have seen the Kano, Lamido Sanusi, performing this traditional responsibility functions, and then he's even trying to move, and then you stop him. I believe that he will address that through by filing one form of fundamental rights enforcement or the other. But let me tell you something. There cannot really be an alternative to the court when it comes to resolving crisis. But it is easier for those who are fomenting crisis to simply just stop. The president should not be interested in what's going on with Kano Traditional Council. And then there are no persons, certain persons who are wielding security powers at the federal level should not at this time begin to cause confusion because they are controlling the police or because they are controlling the security architecture at the federal level, and then they can overrun the Kano State because the governor does not control any police force. So you see, this again brings to fore the issue of state police. If the Kano State governor is in control of a number of policemen today, he could have been able to deploy the policemen to protect the emir. And then when there is sort of a situation where there is conflict at that point, the law comes in. This has to do with the traditional institution, chieftaincy matter that is within the powers and the functions of the governor and the State House of Assembly. And in that case, if it had its own policemen, it would have been able to protect the emir, and this embarrassment would not be in place.
So two things. Do you think then, I don't want to only focus on Kano State, that there's a gap, there's something lacking, or there's a link missing when it comes to judicial pronunciations, orders, judgments, or whatever? There's a missing link
of course,
when it comes to the enforcement of that order or whatever that is.
The presumption of the courts and the constitution is that once an order of court is pronounced, no matter how stupid it appears, it must first of all be obeyed, especially by the federal government that should give example to the rest of the world. So the missing link is the disregard for court orders, especially by government, by politicians who see court orders as tools to be used for political chicanery. That should stop. Now, the sanctity of court orders must be restored by the behavior, by the conduct of judges and the judiciary. Today, a respected lawyer is in incarceration, is being punished because of the views he has expressed. I'm talking about Dele Farotimi. He's in detention right now because of the views he has expressed about Nigerian judiciary. Another lawyer has not minced words, and I'm talking about the respected and brilliant Professor Chidi Odinkalu. He has constantly deprecated the Nigerian judiciary, not because he hates the judges, many of them who are his classmates. It is because the hope of this country, stability, whether in business, whether in politics, whether we want to develop, is in the fact that we have peace and order.
Okay.
And it's resident in the judiciary. If the judiciary constantly loses respect and does not live up to its constitutional function, we might just have an political implosion, and then all of us will be consumed. That day should never come.
Okay. Frank Tietie, thank you so much for the views expressed on this matter. We do appreciate your time.